If you keep saying no, pretty soon I'm going to start believing you. Pretty soon I'm going to start thinking that what you want is something totally different. Pretty soon I'm going to start doubting you when you say you want to work something out with me. Welcome back, and thank you for wanting to know the facts and the truth. What's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is big. You can't miss it on the news. You can't miss it on college campuses, and you really can't miss it online. But what are the facts? Why is this happening? That's what we're here to answer. Our approach is to examine the major themes and focus on the important events that help you make sense of what's happening today. We care about knowing the truth. We also care about the basic human right to live in peace. We care about ending the suffering. We care about finding justice. And we think you're here because you do too. The only path for us then is to go after the facts and be open to what they show us. Life can be beautiful without hatred, violence, and war, and maybe the way there starts with better understanding each other. Better understanding the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, the history of their conflicts and past peace efforts, and some of the major issues standing in the way of forging real peace. What the Hell is Going On in Gaza is a 9-part series made up of 30 episodes, each designed to help you understand a different but important part of the picture. Here in part 4 of our series, we'll talk about how there have been attempts to find peace between Israel and the Palestinians for decades and decades. Why has it failed so many times? What's really going on? Over the next 3 episodes, we'll answer these questions. Here's what we'll cover. Episode 18, Who Rejected Peace? Episode 19, What About Land for Peace? And Episode 20, Did Israel Give Up? First up is Episode 18, where we'll review past peace offers. You know already that they've all failed, but why they failed is important to understand. So let's get started. There have been many legitimate attempts at peace. Proposed solutions to the conflict, first between Jews and Arabs, and then between Israelis and Palestinians. This episode is about what went wrong, who rejected these opportunities for peace, and why. So let's be direct. The only sincere, legitimate proposals for peace have come from the Israelis, often through or in cooperation with the United States or the UN. All were rejected. But before we look into why, let's go through a few of them. No sincere two-state solution has ever been proposed by the Arab or Palestinian side, and no two-state solution ever offered to the Arab or Palestinian side has ever been accepted. In 1937, Jewish leaders accepted the Peel Commission report that recommended a partitioning of Palestine to create separate Jewish and Arab states. Arab leaders did not. In 1947, Jewish leaders accepted the UN partition plan that called for the establishment of separate Jewish and Arab states. Arab leaders did not. In 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak offered Palestinians 95% of the West Bank, 100% of Gaza, a Palestinian capital in Jerusalem, and Palestinian religious autonomy on the Temple Mount. Palestinian leaders did not accept. Also in 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak accepted the plan proposed by U.S. President Bill Clinton, giving Palestinians 97% of the West Bank, 100% of Gaza, Palestinian control of the Temple Mount, and a Palestinian capital in Jerusalem. Palestinians did not accept. In 2008, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert offered Palestinians 93.7% of the West Bank, with land from Israel to compensate for the rest, 100% of Gaza, an end to Israeli sovereignty on the Temple Mount, and a Palestinian capital in Jerusalem. Yet again, Palestinian leaders did not accept. And there have been others, but the story is always the same. Palestinian leaders have rejected peace proposal after peace proposal. Has every offer to the Palestinians been ideal? Of course not. Trump's deal of the century, for example, was less compelling than previous peace offers. But don't lose the forest for the trees. Every attempt at peace has failed because the Palestinian side has rejected it. The big question, the necessary question, is why? Every attempt at peace has failed because the Palestinian side has never budged from its position that a Jewish state cannot be allowed to exist in the Arab world. Sometimes this position is thinly veiled behind the demand for right of return. Sometimes it is cloaked in an expressed dissatisfaction with specific agreement terms. Sometimes it's renewed terrorism that's used to thwart the peace process. But in the end, the story always ends the same way. But why should Israel have to defend its right to exist? Does any other country on earth have to do that? The 20th century saw the dissolution of multiple empires: the Russian Empire, the British Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. As a result, so many new countries came into existence. But when is the legitimacy or right to exist of Iraq challenged, or Jordan, or Syria, or Lebanon, or Turkey? What about Czechoslovakia, or Estonia, or Latvia, or Lithuania, or Poland? What about India, or Pakistan, or Bangladesh? They're not challenged, only Israel. Abba Eban, the former Israeli foreign minister and Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, said, quote, "Nobody does Israel any service by proclaiming its right to exist. Israel's right to exist, like that of the United States, Saudi Arabia, and 152 other states, is axiomatic and unreserved. Israel's legitimacy is not suspended in midair, awaiting acknowledgement. There is certainly no other state, big or small, young or old, that would consider mere recognition of its right to exist a favor or a negotiable concession. But for Israel, it's constantly questioned. Even though Jews have lived in Palestine for thousands of years, even though it is their ancestral homeland, even though the process of creating a Jewish state in the land of Israel was supported by the Balfour Declaration, the San Remo Conference, the Peel Commission, and a vote of the United Nations. Even so, the reality of the situation is that Israel's right to exist is not just questioned, but denied. When the Arab world says from the river to the sea, hopeful Westerners don't seem to believe them, but that is exactly what they have always meant. Many U.S. presidents have tried to midwife peace in the Middle East. None have succeeded. Here's what U.S. President Bill Clinton had to say. Quote, "I killed myself to give the Palestinians a state. I had a deal they turned down that would have given them all of Gaza, between 96 and 97% of the West Bank, compensating land in Israel, you name it." Most of all, Clinton blamed longtime PLO chairman Arafat. Newsweek reported that, quote, "Arafat called to bid him farewell 3 days before he left office." Quote, "You are a great man," Arafat said. "The hell I am," Clinton said. He responded. "I'm a colossal failure, and you made me one." Later in this same article, Newsweek reports that Arafat torpedoed the peace talks by demanding the right of return for Palestinians in numbers that Arafat knew were impossible. By the way, he also knew what Israel was dealing with in Hamas. Even back then, he said, quote, "Hamas is really smart. When they decide to rocket Israel, they insinuate themselves in the hospitals, in the schools, in the highly populous areas, and they're smart. They said they try to put the Israelis in a position of either not defending themselves or killing innocents. They're good at it. They're smart. They've been doing this a long time." Let's talk about the right of return and who Palestinians think should have this right. As we covered in episode 15, there are nearly 6 million Palestinians who are defined as refugees today. Some 700,000 Arabs left Palestine during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Some left voluntarily in anticipation of Arab armies eradicating the Jews. Some left in fear of the war, including in fear of these foreign Arab fighters. Others were forcibly expelled. No one knows for sure how many left for which reason or which combination of reasons, but it is absolutely false to claim all or even the majority were forced out by the Israelis. What is certain is the Arabs started the war, and the war is what led to the Palestinian exodus. If you haven't watched episode 15 on the Nakba, please do. It's so important to understand the facts of what really happened. Over time, the right of return has become an intransigent demand of the Palestinians. It is an article of faith now that the descendants of anyone who left in 1948 is entitled to return and reclaim some portion of the state of Israel, even if they are the great-grandchildren of an Arab from Palestine who then might only be 12.5% Palestinian Arab. For sure, it's a complicated issue. Not all Arabs were forcibly expelled or left in fear for their lives, but some were and did. Not all Palestinians have a clear and direct connection to the land in the state of Israel, but some do. Even if that's only 10% of Palestinian refugees today, for them, it's all very real and painful, and they are truly victims. What characterizes the problem today are three things. One, as we just discussed, some Palestinians are innocent victims of the events of 1948, and some aren't. Two, Palestinian demands on right of return have always been absolute. On this point, let's go back to the Newsweek article we discussed earlier in this episode. U.S. President Bill Clinton said it was the right of return demand that ruined Palestinians' best chance for peace since 1948. In his words, quote, "The key issue that torpedoed the talks in their final stages was not the division of East Jerusalem between Palestinians and Israelis, but the Palestinian demand for a right of return of refugees to Israel." He also said, quote, "But Arafat continued to demand that large numbers of Palestinian refugees, mainly from the 1967 and 1948 wars, be allowed to return, numbers that Clinton said both of them knew were unacceptable to the Israelis." The third issue is that, on a practical level, offering a right of return to 6 million Palestinians is simply impossible. Setting aside for a moment whether these 6 million Palestinian refugees should be allowed into Israel, a nation of 9 million Israelis, including 7 million Jews, cannot possibly absorb 6 million Palestinian refugees, many of whom want them dead. Israel was founded to be both a Jewish state and a democracy. It cannot remain both if 6 million or some other huge number of Palestinian refugees become Israeli citizens. No nation can possibly absorb a sudden two-thirds increase in its population. Then there is the question of whether that demand is founded on sincere beliefs or is simply another strategy to destroy Israel. Knowing this would be the result, it's hard to attribute good faith to demanding that even those who are now citizens of other countries, who may only be 1/8 Palestinian, who may be the great-grandchild of someone who left voluntarily to wait it out while other Arabs slaughtered the Jews, who might themselves not just want Jews dead, but might have even committed acts of terrorism, should be entitled to return and completely upend the state of Israel. Other demands seem equally dubious. Sometimes the division of Jerusalem is the subject of peace negotiations. It's hard to see this as a real issue since, one, Israel agreed to give up Jerusalem in its acceptance of the 1947 UN partition plan, and two, Moshe Dayan voluntarily and promptly gave it back to the Arabs in the hopes of avoiding further conflict after Israeli forces captured the city in the 1967 Six-Day War. Sometimes Palestinian prisoners are the subject of peace negotiations. It's hard to see this as a real issue either, when Israel has always been willing to agree to disproportionate swaps, even 1,000 to 1, and even when the released Palestinians are convicted murderers being exchanged for Israeli civilians held hostage. The real issue has always been that Israel's very existence is intolerable, and because of that, no peace plan that allows Israel to survive is acceptable, and no peace negotiation that would lead there is sincere. Even ceasefires are unacceptable to the more extremist Palestinian groups like Hamas. According to the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, quote, Hamas rejected proposals for a new ceasefire in December and January. Israel agreed on March 23rd to pause its counteroffensive in Gaza for 6 weeks and release approximately 700 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 40 Israeli hostages, but Hamas rejected that offer 3 days later. In another example, FDD writes, quote, on March 29th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu greenlighted another round of Egyptian and Qatari-mediated talks, giving the Israeli negotiating team what his office described as room to operate. Jerusalem accepted the proposal that came out of those discussions, but Hamas rejected it on April 4th, restating its maximalist position instead. Hamas rejected yet another ceasefire proposal on April 13th, as Iran launched its unprecedented drone and missile attack against the Jewish state. Why does Hamas do this? Because all it really wants is the destruction of Israel. Hamas keeps saying it and trying to do it, so there really is no reason not to believe them. Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's political leader in Gaza, continues to spread this message. Quote, "We support the eradication of Israel through armed jihad and struggle. This is our doctrine. The occupation must be swept away from all our land." Another example, according to the Middle East Media Research Institute, Ghazi Hamad of the Hamas Political Bureau said on October 24, 2023, on Lebanon's LBC TV that Hamas is prepared to repeat the October 7th Al-Aqsa flood operation time and again until Israel is annihilated. He said, quote, "Israel is a country that has no place on our land. We must remove that country because it constitutes a security, military, and political catastrophe to the Arab and Islamic nation and must be finished." This is why Hamas has rejected ceasefire proposal after ceasefire proposal. For example, this one in February. Again and again. For example, in this case, when it was brokered by the US, Egypt, and Qatar, which is home to Hamas's political leadership, and accepted by Israel. The Wall Street Journal article states, quote, "As State Department spokesman Matthew Miller explained, Israel moved a significant way in submitting to that proposal, but Hamas rejected it. It is Hamas right now that is the barrier and the obstacle to a ceasefire in Gaza. The Times of Israel reports that Hamas rejected every clause of the proposal brokered by the US, Egypt, and Qatar. In 2021, Israel and Hamas fought an 11-day war, the worst outbreak of violence in Gaza since 2014. It ended with a ceasefire agreement, which Hamas broke less than a month later by launching incendiary balloons into Israel. In case after case, Palestinian leadership has rejected peace proposals from Israel, from third parties like the United States, and even from other Arab nations. Every peace offer, every opportunity to gain true independence and their own state has been ignored, rejected, or met with violence. Why? Because they just won't accept the presence of a Jewish state in the Arab world. Thank you for continuing to watch our series, What the Hell is Going On in Gaza? We hope it helped you understand more of the facts and history of who rejected past peace attempts and why. If you'd like to leave a comment or get in touch, visit our website at www.getthefactsmiddleeast.com. There's still so much more to learn in this series, so we hope you'll keep going with episode 19, where we'll look more closely at land for peace deals, an idea that's been tried before. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest in learning more about the war in Gaza. And remember, where there is no knowledge, there can be no insight.